현재 물소는 이미정 돈을 모는 점보는 게 바크르더는 산도 실물도 돈바 특제잖아 기시험 차를 오늘 전로서는 이정감 선적을 특기심을
Then surpassed profound and wonderful dharmas difficult to encounter in beliefs of aeons. I now see it here, receive and uphold it, vow to fathom the true meaning, to liberate all beings. Let's generate the supreme bodhicitta. Currently, we're studying the 9th chapter of the wish-fulfilling treasury, which is parting ways from the negative friends. Previously, we have already covered on the characteristics of negative friends and then why to part ways from them. Within the reasons, there's the general explanation and then the extensive explanation. Currently, we're talking about the extensive explanations, which has 4 aspects. Yesterday, we have already covered 3 aspects. Today we will talk about the 4th aspect of why we should part ways from the negative influence. No view, no samadhi, breaking precepts, protecting worldly mind, seeking benefits, only grasping no instructions, nihilistic views without insights, and only holding a name as a teacher. The 4th aspect points out of the negativities of the potential defilements if we were to affiliate ourselves with those negative influence. First of all, it is without view and without samadhi, without the kind of realization of understanding emptiness, without insight of Vajrayana, also without samadhi. Without samadhi, without peaceful abiding, without any of those meditative absorption, without the wisdom of no self, without any meditation. If we were to affiliate ourselves with those kinds of people and with the people with such qualities, could lead us to break precepts, let it be the individual liberation precepts or the bodhisattva precepts or the samaya precepts. If we were to associate ourselves with the kind of people whom already break their precepts, any of the 3 above, then we will be tinted with the defilements. We will be poisoned of breaking vows as well. The group of people whom broken their precepts and vows, not only they will defile themselves, they would also defile the whole group. Such kinds of samaya vow perverters cannot engage in any of the activities within the Vajrayana practices, including in Larungar. Currently, we have the same regulations. Also, the breakers of the pratimoksha vows cannot abide at the same place with the whole Sangha. I believe all of you are quite aware of it as well. And then the next one says the ones that protect the worldly mind. In different variations of the prince, some states that the ones that protect the worldly mindset, and some says that the ones that then lean to or study the worldly mind. The worldly here refers to the kind of knowing or knowledge, which means that those people whom would try to have that kind of a worldly mind or the dualistic mind of the mundane ones, but thinking that they themselves have already attained liberation, had already attained enlightenment. If you were to associate yourself with such kind of people, it is truly meaningless and would squander your life, because those group of people would spend every day of their life in dualistic thoughts. Other than that, there is no true insights within their mind. And then do not associate with the ones ones that seeks for benefits and profits for themselves. Because if we were to associate ourselves with those people, we would also seek for other people's wealth or stature and so on and so forth, and will be tinted with such kind of habitual tendencies. Also, if one were to seek in abiding at a peaceful and quiet place, but without any peace instructions of practice, then what's the point of staying at a quiet place? It is really no other than a yak, because a yak would stay at a peaceful place in the mountains, and without those kinds of peace instructions that you can get from a guru, without the bodhicitta, then you would not be able to attain any liberation. You would not be able to gain any benefits in the study, contemplation, and practice, and there would be no insights for your practice as well. Even after a period of time, if you were to abide at quiet places without peace instructions of practice, you may generate wrong views about the three jewels. Many practitioners went through such erroneous path in the past. For example, the bhikshu Sunakshastra, when he studied at the beginning, he memorized the entire 12 categories of the sutras. He was able to recite all of them, but at the end, he did not generate any genuine insights to the Dharma. Even worse, he generated wrong views to the Buddha and the Dharma. So if you were to simply practice at a quiet place without any peace instruction, just simply staying there or giving teachings at a quiet place, then eventually your mindset, your mind stream could be tinted by wrong views. This is truly meaningless. Just as there are people who would stay at a quiet place and then kept on going with their own dualistic mindset, and then eventually they would develop some nihilistic view, even would start talking about how everything is empty, but such kinds of empty is not existent, the three jewels are not existent, nor of the samsara, nor the karmic causes and fruitions. The next one is associating oneself with those kinds of teachers, only upholding the names but do not have any innate experience or insights. They are very good at talking all the flowery words, but they're simply dry words without any true insights. Though they can use lots of those words that sound quite profound, but there is no moist of the renunciation or true bodhicitta. There is no true insights and experience, including during the time of the retreat. Some people may not be able to even generate a little bit of faith or renunciation and simply stay in retreat just like a groundhog. There is no elevation in their insights, though they speak of emptiness and speak of no grasping, but simply in empty words, and there is no true understanding and insights that's infused in their mind stream. In the commentary, it says that on top of that, if one were to associate with people who tend to be logicians, people who tend to have lots of conceptual thoughts, then it's very easy to become a jaded practitioner. Especially, I think, people who study Buddhist logic and start getting very good, very eloquent in terms of debating with others, but there is no nurturing of the mind. Then how could there be any transformations in your own mind stream if you become a jaded practitioner? Another type of practitioners we need to avoid in affiliating ourselves with is the kind of practitioners that would hold on to only the causes and fruitions and think that's the only way to attain liberation. If we were to only think that virtue would lead to virtue and vice vice lead to vice. Other than those kinds of teachings on causes and fruitions, there is no other more profound and more transcending realizations that is the Vajrayana teachings and practices, then that would lead you not being able to accept such kind of profound teachings. These kinds of teachings are for people who would have rather shallow wisdom and would grasp onto the dichotomy, and such kinds of grasping would lead to the incapability of studying the profound Dharma and not in sync with the ultimate teaching of the Dharma, not seeing the true teaching of the Dharma. If you were to associate yourself with such group of people, then that is simply deceiving others and deceiving self. Also, those kinds of people are very good at speaking and very eloquent and good at lip service, but the true insights of the Dharma are still so far away. Though one could speak the best of it, but if you do not place your effort onto the actual ultimate meaning, then it is really not of any benefit. On the other hand, if you do not even understand the words and description of it, then of course it's difficult to attain the true meaning of it either. So when it comes to the Mahāti or the great Madhyamika, it is not something that a foolish one would be able to attain. When it comes to the time when we need to rely on a spiritual teacher, we need to find the kind of spiritual teacher that truly embodies and manifests the Dharma. Not only we need to making the observation upon those qualities, and we need to make observations whether such kind of spiritual teacher embodies the vice qualities. We need to make sure that they do not try to utilize the Dharma to gain fame and benefits. According to the Prajnaparamita Sutra and Angulimala Sutra, it states that not only we need to rely on the virtuous spiritual teacher, we need to part ways from the vice spiritual teachers as well. But of course, the requirements, according to the commentary of the Jewel-Heap Sutra, to be a virtuous spiritual teacher would be rather quite high. It would be very difficult because as long as a bhikshu were to have the dichotomy, then that kind of bhikshu has been blessed and empowered by Maras. If the bhikshu does not have a true faith towards the Mahayana Dharma, then that bhikshu has been blessed by Maras. So that kind of a requirement is rather quite high. It is a requirement to someone who had already attained the highest realization. As long as one has not attained the highest realization, then one would definitely be having such kind of dichotomy. Maybe the sutra's requirement is to the true and genuine, the most profound spiritual teacher. But when it comes to the spiritual teachers whom are simply mundane beings, then it's rather quite difficult. Now we have already covered the four aspects of vice spiritual teacher. Now we're going to look at the teachings on parting ways from the vice spiritual teachers, which has two aspects. The first one is the actual teaching. It says in the verse that by relying on such kinds of teachers, then you would have obstacles on the path of liberation. It would seize all the virtue in you and not being able to be reborn in virtuous places. Don't even mention about the ultimate peace, the Bodhi. For such reasons, we need to part ways from the vice companions. By making the previous observations, we need to understand that we need to part ways from those kinds of vice companions or a vice spiritual teacher, because that could create obstacles onto our path of liberation. All of us who are sitting here and listening to this class are seeking liberation. For such reason, you've already moved to this place and listening to the Dharma teachings. Majority of us, I believe, are here to recognize the nature of your mind and to part ways from this mundane world. You're here to seek for liberation. If you were to rely on a vice spiritual teacher, then there is really really no hope for you to attain liberation. On top of that, all of the virtuous deeds that you've accumulated to attain liberation would not increase but decrease, eventually get all extinguished. And then the result would be not able to be reborn in virtuous and higher realms. If you cannot even attain that kind of fruition of enjoying the higher realms, such as human beings or celestial beings, then where can you talk about attain the fruition and realization of the ultimate peace and the great bliss of Bodhi? Therefore, as someone who is seeking for liberation and engage in practice, and as practitioners, we need to make observation with our wisdom. We need to make observation to distinguish who is the wise spiritual teacher and who is the virtuous. We need to part ways from the wise spiritual teachers. As I stated yesterday, Pönzog Rinpoche used to say that do not rely on the wise spiritual teacher, but the wise spiritual teachers that's mixed within the Sangha are not very obvious. They are very difficult to distinguish sometimes. Because most of the times our view, practice, action, and the fruition that we would seek are very similar. However, if a wise companion's mind stream has been fettered by greed, anger, and ignorance, such kinds of wise companions are very difficult to distinguish from the others, such as the heretics or the Maras. Therefore, Pönzog Rinpoche would use the example as the wise companions are not necessarily the ones that grows horns and hoofs, rather are the ones that's been tinted in the mind stream with the wrong views and do not have faith and do not have the right view in their mind stream for the three jewels. We should be able to see that out of all the people that we interact with, other than very few of them, the majority of people would expose their inner thinking through their body language and their speech. So if you can be very observant and quite smart and sharp in distinguishing people in such a way, then you would be able to see through all of those veils. You should be able to see if a person's mind stream were to be permeated with the wrong views or not. If so, then we need to part ways from them. According to the sutra, it says that we need to disassociate ourselves with the miserly ones, the ones without faith, as well as the ones that create disharmony. We have already expounded on the actual explanation on parting ways from the wise companion. Now, let's look at the two examples. The first example is the example of a bandit, and then the second one is the example of a guard and the trading business. So let's look at the first one. It says that just as a traveler that tread onto a dangerous path, being feared by the possibility of burglars and bandits, may take this traveler's life as well as the wealth. So the first example refers to a visitor or a traveler treading on a really dangerous path, because the path is quite far and dangerous, so he would generate great fear. And this traveler would fear that the burglar would rob all of the wealth and even his life. I think nowadays, in some places, the social safety are much better, but in Africa, in certain places, you need to hire a policeman to sit at the very front. Otherwise, there could be burglars and bandits on the way. In the ancient times, when people were passing those dangerous paths in the forests and those kinds of particularly dangerous places where the bandits would occupy, then the traveler would get quite terrified. On one hand, you should be terrified of those. On the other, it is rather quite normal, because if you were to encounter a bandit, then usually they would just take away the wealth that you have accumulated in this lifetime. And probably the worst thing that the bandit would do is to take away the life of this time, but that would be it. The worst thing that the bandit could do is to take away the wealth and life of this lifetime, and that's it. Other than that, there's really nothing more the bandits would be able to do. It's rather quite simple. In the worldly sense, we would say that, well, what's the worst that you can do? The worst thing that you can do is probably to kill me and to take all of my wealth. Other than that, there is nothing more that you can do. But for people who understand that there are lifetimes to come, then the happiness of the lifetimes can be taken away by the vice companions. So over here it says that the vice companions are worse than the bandits. It says that by relying on the vice companion, the sentient beings would be scolded by the noble ones, and the virtuous gods would abandon such kind of person, and this person would be suffering lots of disasters and suffering from various kinds of pains that would lead to the destruction of this lifetime. In the future lifetimes, one would be reborn in lower realms and continuously to wander in the ocean of samsara and existence, not fearing parting from the supreme noble wealth. Such kind of a person has been fooled by the maras. Over here it speaks of relying on the vice companion could lead to the poor condition of the sentient beings. The great masters of the past, as well as the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, would scold and criticize the ones that would rely on a vice companion, a vice spiritual teacher, because that would lead one to only care about the worldly graspings, but not of the path of liberation. The virtuous gods and spirits would no longer protect such kind of person. The three great protectors, the protector of the ground and all of those guardian protectors and so on, would no longer protect such kind of person. According to the Mipa Rinpoche's teaching on the conducts of mundane and transmundane, it says that if a person is not a worthy vessel for the Dharma, then, or if such kind of vessel is no longer pure, then it doesn't matter how much you want to invite the protectors, they would no longer protect you because your vessel is filthy. On top of that, there are all kinds of suffering and pain would appear to such kind of person. By relying on a wise companion temporarily, you may gain certain benefits, but eventually you will have all kinds of suffering and pain that would appear in your lifetime. And what's more important is that in the future lifetimes, one would be reborn in the three lower realms and wandering in samsara. By now, we can see that by relying on a negative companion, the negative result far surpass that of a destruction a bandit could bring about to us. Also, it says that if one do not fear of parting from the noble wealth such as the faith, wisdom, precepts, those are considered as a seven noble wealth. If a person do not fear of parting from the seven noble wealth, then this person has been fooled by the Maras. If one do not fear of the negative friends, which could you part from the seven noble wealth and feel that, well, whatever you would say, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the noble ones would criticize me or scold me. It doesn't matter if the virtuous gods and spirits would abandon me. It doesn't even matter if things do not, if I do not have favorable conditions in my lifetime. I really like this person. Though that you're telling me that they are negative friends, they are negative influence upon me, I still like this person. I will stay with this person day and night. If a person were to reply you in such a way, then this person indeed has been empowered and blessed by the Maras, and this person does not have any freedom to choose the right from the wrong. And this person is in such a poor condition. So people whomever rely on those negative influence and negative companions, not only they have eradicated the connections to the virtue, more importantly, they do not even know that they have completely stopped the connections to virtue. According to the Jewel Heap Sutra, it says that parting from the virtuous spiritual companions but affiliate oneself with the vice, one will be turned by the teachings from the vice and eventually be led to be reborn in the lower realms. So we would say that in this world, the beasts are afraid of hunters. The sparrows are afraid of the eagles or owls. The rats are afraid of cats. But within the human beings, usually we're afraid of the murderers or mad elephants. But the vice companion are more terrifying than those stated above. According to Parinirvana Sutra, it states that the bodhisattvas are afraid of the negative influence because the negative influence, unlike a mad elephant that could destroy the physical body of ours of this lifetime, but it would not destroy our future lifetimes. But a negative influence not only would destroy our body in this lifetime, would destroy the future lifetimes, the immeasurable future lifetimes, because they would destroy the wisdom life of ours. So by relying on the negative influence, we will endure a lot more of suffering and pain. Well, at this point, you may argue that, well, this person is not that great, but I am not turned to his way of the vice. I am not being influenced by this person. But other people will make rumors and start gossip behind you and would also make different comments about you by affiliating with this negative influence. According to the Equal Agama Sutra, it says that if a person were not vice to start with, but affiliate oneself with the vice, then such kinds of affiliation will become the cause of vice. Eventually, this person will be infamous, and such kinds of negative reputation will be prevalent throughout the world. Though that people have not conducted anything negative, but because this person is in contact with a negative companion, then other people would no longer give you a positive feedback. And for such a reason, whomsoever would get close to this person, then others would also scold and warn them. On one hand, we could say that I'm not being transformed and turned and influenced by other people, but it is very rare that people, the foolish ones, would not be transformed or turned by the others. According to Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it says that there's only the very supreme and noble one that has a very special virtuous roots would be able to sustain one's own characteristics and principle among the wise ones as well as among the women. It is only the very rare one that would not be influenced by the people around them and by the environment. That's why in the Chinese tradition, there's the folklore of how the mother of Mencius moved 3 times in order to create a virtuous condition for Mencius when he was growing up. Not many people would be able to maintain or stand for his ground at all times. Most people will be influenced by the others and by the environment. Then when you do get influence from the wise ones, it is very difficult for you to rely on the spiritual teacher. And even if you can rely on a virtuous spiritual teacher, it sometimes would be difficult for you to transform back to be virtuous again. And you can never know if you were to have the opportunity to encounter a virtuous teacher anymore. So it would be the best for you not to associate with the negative influence. Now, the next verse talks about the example of the guard and then the trade. Over here, it says that from the worldly angle, to deeply contemplate upon this example, one needs to contemplate and question whether the guard is good or bad. If one were to attain liberation but not to question and contemplate upon the teacher, such kinds of foolish one would be destroyed by the maras. Now, in the world, from the worldly angle, whatever we need to do, we need to go through contemplations so that we can make a choice. Over here, I use the example to demonstrate the importance of it. For example, if we were to tread over a very dangerous path, we need a guard that would help us to go through this part. Then we need to go through lots of deep contemplations and observations. To give you an example, if we were to take a car from Sirta to Chengdu, we need to make the observation whether the driver is good or not, whether the car is good or not. It would be better if we have a good driver and a good car, isn't it? It's more safer. Or if I were to find a companion to accompany me to on the trip, is this companion that I chose going to blackmail me or threaten me halfway through? Is that a possibility? So we need to make such kinds of observation and contemplation. Now, coming back to the example of a guardian or guard, you need to ask others, you need to make observation first, and then if not, you can ask the others how's the reputation and if this person is capable of guard me through this dangerous path or not. So you need to again and again making the observation and then ask around and then come to a conclusion. At the time of now, when we apply the same principle onto liberation, which is something that we want to attain and that is eternal, such kind of important thing that we need to make a decision, we need to definitely ask around and need to contemplate and then need to make observation. If you do not do any of those but rely on a teacher, then this person is indeed very foolish and have very shallow wisdom. The troops of the Mara must be destroying you, will be destroying you. So if a person were not to engage in making observation, but rather harshly making a decision on relying on a teacher as a spiritual teacher, just based on looking at some advertisement saying that this teacher had been toku and has such wonderful spiritual powers and has such a profound realization and does not give those teachings just to anyone. So this is such a rare opportunity. You definitely have to receive it. And then believing in those words from an advertisement and then relying on this teacher at that moment, that is the person being empowered by Mara to believe in such a teacher. So for such kind of person, very directly pointed out by Longchenpa, he stated that in our day and time, there are people that's been empowered by the Maras and destroyed by the Maras. There are a great number of people who would rely on the spiritual teachers in such a way without making any observations. Rather, they're quite gullible and listen to others' advocates quite easily, saying that, oh, this one's really great, you should receive empowerment, and then would do so. Ponso Rinpoche commented upon such kind of a situation with the example of how a hungry dog at the time of seeing a piece of flesh would gobble it up without making any observations, and they would rather gobble it up really quickly. But this type of behavior is rather very dangerous. I believe nowadays, over here, people are getting better, though still not excellent, but better than how it used to be. In the past, especially at the time of giving the teaching on words of my perfect teacher and entering the way of the bodhisattvas, people really, before I give teachings on those, people had no idea of how to distinguish the charlatans from the genuine spiritual teachers. But those two teachings definitely helped a group of the Chinese practitioners to make those discernments. Nowadays, maybe because of the policies are tightening up and people started to getting better at making those discernments and started making the observation of the background and wisdom and compassion and precepts and activities. People would start making discernments based on the information they would gather. In the past, I have heard that the worldly people at the time of finding kindergarten teachers for their children, they would be very careful. So if the worldly parents would do so for their children, why wouldn't we also make very careful discernment at the time of finding a spiritual teacher that would lead you to the most important destination of your life, which is liberation? Because if you were not to rely on the correct type of teacher in Buddhism, then in fact, in the Buddhism teaching, after you already relied on the teacher, you would no longer speak of the faults of that teacher. And if you were to rely on a charlatan, then it would get quite difficult and complex. So do not rely on the teacher, and then after relying on the teacher, you started speaking the faults of the teacher, because that would lead to detrimental results, such as being reborn in Avicii hell for yourself. Those kinds of teachings has been taught in the Bodhisattva Charivatara, Words of My Perfect Teacher, and 50 verses of Serving the Teacher. And when I was giving teachings on those, many didn't really want to listen to me, and many people still do not agree with me. But I insisted on giving those teachings because I feel that it is crucial information for the disciples to know. Otherwise, if you were to rely on a spiritual teacher hastily, it could be a sign of being empowered and blessed by the Maras, and being fettered by the Maras indeed is quite sad and pitiful. Now let's look at the next example where it uses the example of taking the falseful ones as liberation, as the Dharma of liberation is inappropriate. Over here it says that using the inferior jewels to conduct trades and sales, not understanding it, not having knowledge of it, one should ask of the others. But if one were to enter into the path of the Dharma without wisdom, without the eye of wisdom, being completely blind in contemplation and studies, not asking the wise ones and not engaging in contemplation, such kinds of person who seeks for liberation are being fooled by the Maras. Over here, the example speaks of from the worldly angle, whenever there are the trades of various kinds of things, the jewels, clothing, cars, or whatsoever it could be. If the product is rather quite inferior, which is equivalent to an inferior type of teaching, if we want to buy it, we need to know the quality and know how much it is worth. If you don't, then at least you should ask people who are professionals at it. For example, if you want to buy a car, then you need to ask various kinds of questions about whether this car is domestically made or is it imported, what's the made of it, and how's the quality of it, and how's the mileage, and so on and so forth. In some ways, it is not completely equivalent to the Dharma, because the Dharma is the most supreme wealth. Without our study, contemplation, and practice, we would not possible to have the idea of what the Dharma is. There are people, for example, do not have any of the eye of wisdom. Without the wisdom eye of the study, contemplation, and practice, without the wisdom eye of distinguishing what is acceptable and what should be abandoned, then this person can be considered as blind. There are people who do not have great wisdom nor of contemplation, study, and practice. Then such kind of person is just like a blind one. A blind one to seek for the wealth of Dharma could be very difficult, just as a blind person goes to a mall and trying to buy something, and without asking, without requiring information from the others, then that could be quite difficult. And when it applies to Dharma, then that could be quite horrifying. If one do not ask for the wise ones for suggestions and do not engage in personal contemplation and further observation, how could one seek for liberation? Without any teachings, pith instructions, or any of the logical inference, but giving teachings to the others. On top of that, if other people were to give better teachings than them, then they would start having lots of jealousy and start slandering the others. So that would be quite terrifying. There are people nowadays do not understand how to rely on spiritual teacher and do not let their disciples to rely on a virtuous spiritual teacher. On one hand, it is because they have jealousy. On the other, it is because they do not know how to give teachings on the Dharma. Then, according to Venerable Longchenpa, he said that at the Dark Age, there are lots of the monastics that's been empowered by the Maras would pretend to be teachers, and those kinds of bhikshus that have excessive pride to themselves themselves would appear in this world. Not only they do not respect the genuine spiritual teacher, not asking and requesting teachings from the others, but they would use their jealousy and harmful mind to slander the others. At the time of death, such kind of person would be reborn in hell realm. This time is my first time giving teaching on parting from the negative influence. And I believe this is your first time listening to these teachings in front of me. This could be my first time and could be my last time of giving this teaching. And this could be your first time listening to this from me and last time from me as well. I believe the wise ones would be able to gain great benefits from this teaching, and the kind of people without wisdom might generate a great deal of wrong views. Other than that, in their mind stream, there's not going to be much changes. At the time of translating it, I thought it would be wonderful for the students to study this, because in our daily life, there are lots of people do not make observations of a spiritual teacher, and there are lots of people who are associated with the negative friends. There are lots of people like such. I've seen great practitioners led by the negative influence and then eventually lost their initial aspiration on the path. So each of us, before the actual wind comes, the actual tornado comes, we need to build a wall to prevent it. We need, in order to prevent the obstacles, we need to build a castle. We need to build the castle of right mindfulness. In such a way, we should be able to protect ourselves. As a practitioner, we can chant mantras to dispel the obstacles, and sometimes we need to understand how to protect ourselves. In this way, our actions can truly protect ourselves. Now let's look at the merit of parting ways from the vice influence. Over here it says that with these types of observation, one should part ways from the negative influence. Such kinds of merit is infinite. One will not fall into the lower realms or the wrong ways, but constantly increase on the virtue. The noble ones would praise such kinds of accumulation of merits. Here it points out that the practitioners at the times of relying on spiritual teacher, you need to make observations and you need to know the characteristics of the negative companions and negative influence. If you notice that the spiritual teacher has those kinds of negative qualities, then it is better for you to part from them as soon as possible. If you already relied on such kind of teacher, and you notice the influence is not meaningful to your mind stream, but increased a great deal of afflictions, then at that time you don't need to create a great conflict with such kind of teacher. Rather, you can part ways from this teacher. That would be good. For such a person that part ways from the negative influence, the merit is infinite. In this lifetime, we have already studied of the various kinds of merits of parting ways from the negative influence. First of all, in the coming lifetime, one would be able to temporarily obtain the kinds of merits of the human beings or the celestial beings. And then the kinds of merits would lead to the prevention from falling into the wrong path. If we were to rely on a spiritual teacher, our very basic expectation is not to fall into the wrong path and the lower realms. In comparison, by relying on Phuntsog Rinpoche and the lineage masters, we need to rely on the teachings. I do not dare to say that the Khenpos and the teachers from Larungar are all 100% virtuous spiritual teachers. I do not dare to make such kinds of proclamation, but at least the kinds of Dharma, the teachings that we've studied over here are all the correct teachings. For example, the wish-fulfilling treasury, the words of my perfect teacher, the Bodhisattva Charavatara, all of those are pure and correct Dharma. And in terms of the quality of such, I believe there is no problem at all. As long as your faith can follow such kinds of teachings, as well as your wisdom can follow such kinds of teachings, you can engage in such kind of studies for sure. And you will indeed part ways from the wrong path. The next one says that the virtue will constantly increase. One would be praised by the great masters and the noble ones, and the contemplation study would further increase and develop. The protectors who would constantly protect such kind of person. According to the Great Heap Sutra, it also says that if one can abandon the vice influence and affiliate oneself with a virtuous teacher, then the Bodhi path will further increase, just like the waxing moon. This particular statement is very similar to that is included in the Jewel Cloud Sutra. Also, it says that the Bodhisattvas would not be together with the vice companions. The true practitioners would not associate with the negative companions. There is really no place for such negative influence for the true practitioners. Within a group that has more of the virtue, has more of the power of the virtue, then there would be the weak power of the vice influence. The more virtuous, then the more weak of the negative influence. I think currently in Larungar, the majority of the practitioners are the ones who seek for liberation. So the life over here are rather quite simple compared to the worldly competitiveness and the cunnings of the worldly behaviors. But of course, we're all mundane beings. In our mind stream, we have still the various habitual tendencies and afflictions. In general, I do hope that as long as you're here, you need to tune your mind into the Dharma and try to transform yourself, especially after relying on the spiritual teacher. You should focus on transforming your own mind stream. And then the next part of the qualities, including the right mindfulness, samadhi, and vast wisdom, the kind of right mindfulness of contemplating upon the correct Dharma. Also, the kinds of samadhi within our practice would be further increased and further developed. The vast wisdom of knowing liberation and knowing what to accept and what to abandon. Happiness and comfort in this lifetime would increase as well. If you were to rely on a virtuous spiritual teacher, then there would be longevity and abundance in wealth. Also, your whole outlook would be quite healthy and open and healthy. Whenever people look at you, everyone would be rather quite happy happy as well. The celestial beings, protectors, and gods and spirits would praise you and scatter the auspicious flower petals. At the same time, whatever you wish for would be fulfilled, and everything would proceed quite successfully. So, the kind of person that relies on the genuine spiritual teacher would have a healthy mindset and outlook to the world. During our lifetime, whenever there's the difficulties and the various kinds of obstacles, for a genuine practitioner, he or she would be able to work through that very quickly. So there would be lots of happiness. The kinds of practitioners that I get in touch with, including many of the disciples of Ponsokul Rinpoche and those senior disciples, after practicing for a long period of time, it seems that they would not have lots of sadness or loneliness or difficulties and obstacles. At the time of encountering some obstacles, on one hand, we can supplicate to Ponsokul Rinpoche. On the other, even if there were some obstacles, we can still face it rather very easily. Those little sufferings and little unhappiness that we encounter in this lifetime would be really easy to work through as long as we have received the Dharma and practice upon it. So that could lead to happiness in this lifetime. And then in the future lifetimes, we would be able to be reborn as a human beings or as celestial beings, and slowly we will also have the opportunity to be reborn in Pure Land. In the verse over here, the Pure Land used a different way of description. The expression in the verse is the other shore of the constant higher realm. Over there, being reborn in Pure Land and Sukhavati, one would definitely be able to see Amitabha and all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, all the adornments of Pure Land, including the wish-fulfilling tree, the wish-fulfilling pond, all kinds of palaces and all kinds of castles that is filled with great merits, that's perfected with great merits, and by the blessings of the noble ones at the time of being reborn there, one would be able to complete the merits of the 5 paths and 10 bhumis and attain the kinds of samadhi of wisdom. All of those can be completed and can be fulfilled and attain the true bodhi over there. If you want to be reborn in Sukhavati, we need to do whatever we could over here in this lifetime. Even if you finish chanting the 6 million times of Amitabha or 400,000 times of Amitabha, but if you were to associate with the negative influence every day, eventually your virtuous roots will be destroyed, and that would not lead you to be reborn in Sukhavati. So as someone who seeks for liberation, we definitely need to part our ways from the negative influence. Do not stay with them, associate with them, and communicate with them, or having dinner together with them. It is crucial. This is stated in the Sutra of Right Mindfulness. So we need to know that the kind of person that would use harsh language and disrespectful words to talk to and talk about your teacher, that is considered as a negative influence. The kind of person that slanders, disrespects in front of the teacher or behind the teacher's back to talk about your own root teacher, as well as generating the wrong views to your root teacher, then such kind of person is considered as a vice companion. You should not walk the same path or having meals or chat with such kind of person. In the Vinaya Sutra, it talks about not to associate with the kind of person that hold a grudge and having harmful feelings towards your own virtuous spiritual teacher. You should not associate with such kind of person, not living with such kind of person, not to communicate or speak to such kind of person, nor to be respectful to such kind of person. Rather, you should ignore such a person, and you should not rejoice the activity of such kind of person, nor praise such a kind of person, nor to follow such kind of person. Otherwise, you would become a vow breaker, which is quite dangerous. The kind of vice influence like such, out of all the perverters of the vows, in our mind, we do not need to abandon them. We do not need to give up them. But we need to recognize that those people are indeed quite pitiful because they have such great afflictions and such wrong views. And by slandering the virtuous spiritual teachers would lead to detrimental results. So in this lifetime, as someone who lives with the Sangha, I need to protect my own practice and not to associate myself with this group of people. But eventually, one day, once I have the opportunity and the capacity to liberate them, I indeed will do so. So in my mind, I will not abandon such kind of person because I know this kind of people are quite pitiful. So I would have great compassion towards them. I do not have aggression towards this kind of people. But in order to protect my own mind stream, when I'm not capable to liberate them, I need to part ways from them so that my own mind stream is not tainted by them. According to the Jewel Cloud Sutra, it says that at the time of parting ways from the negative friends, it states that the negative friends, including the ones who are the perverter of the precepts and the ones that do not uphold the proper actions, the ones that enjoy distractions, the ones that are quite lazy, and the ones that's drawn to samsara, parting ways from the Bodhi. There are 10. Maybe you should look into it. I believe it states 10, but over here I can only see 7. It states that the perverters of the precepts, the one upholds the wrong view, the ones do not uphold the proper behavior, the ones that enjoys destruction, the lazy ones. There should be 10. So we should part ways from them, from those kinds of negative teachers, including the precept teachers and the gurus, the acharyas. According to the Sutras and Tantras, it states that if you want to become a true seeker of liberation, we should try our best to rely on virtuous spiritual teachers and part ways from the negative spiritual teachers. This is quite crucial. I believe many of us truly developed faith at the time of studying this chapter. I believe you studied quite diligently. Maybe we should stop here today. We have now completed the 9th chapter of the Mahayana wish-fulfilling treasury on the chapter of parting ways from the negative influence. The next chapter is on the teacher and disciple, and the 12th chapter is on the different schools and philosophical schools, which is a little bit difficult because it talks about the various kinds of schools in the world. So later we'll look at it.